Another important idea is this idea of Buddha nature. We talked about that a little bit in Huineng. So here the idea is that all beings have a kind of inherent Buddha nature. And we saw this, Dogen gets this from the sect that he was a monk in before. So there's a bunch of different ways people have interpreted the idea of Buddha nature. I'll just quickly go through a couple. If it's confusing, don't sweat it. So some people think that Buddha nature is just a kind of a property that things have. So in the way that's like, this pen is black, this paper is white. The paper has the property of being white, has the quality of whiteness. You have the quality of Buddha nature. You have that as a quality. So that's one view of it. Another way to think about it is as it's like a thing that's sort of housed in different beings. So it's like there's cheese in my fridge and there's cheese in your fridge. So we say there's cheese in these. All of the fridges have cheese in them. That's another way to think about it. Finally, many people have thought about it as a kind of potential. You might that it's a kind of capacity or potential for enlightenment. When people talk about talent, so someone would say, "Hey, kid, you got the talent in you. You can't do it now, but you have the talent." There means that you have the capacity for it. Or a kind of on a more morbid potential, someone's like, "Hey, you're mortal." To have the property of being mortal means that like eventually you will die. You're not dead now, but that's so it exists as a kind of potential. So none of those is exactly Dogen's view. He thinks that Buddha nature is not a thing. It's not. It's a kind of property of everything. In particular, he's rejecting this sort of metaphor of it as a potential. So if we think about it in the talent metaphor, there's like the talent, and then you do a bunch of work, and then you get enlightenment. And for Dogen, that makes practice and enlightenment two separate. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. But he thinks that they're deeply intertwined. Let's just talk about it now. Let's talk about it because we'll just end on that. It's a good place to end. So if you remember early on, Dogen was bugged by this question of if we all have Buddha nature, if we're all inherently enlightened, why do we do this practice stuff? And one way that's a kind of similar to what he says about being and time, that they're sort of the same. He thinks that about practice enlightenment. So he doesn't think that enlightenment and practice are separate things. That he thinks they're just sort of very deeply intertwined. It's not like one leads to the other, but they're part of the same activity. So one way to think about it is like when we do things that are fun. So maybe you're dancing just for fun, or you're just playing music just for fun. Not like to learn a particular piece or to perform or to whatever, but you're just doing something for fun. Or like you might even something like going for a walk. Maybe you're not going for a walk to get anywhere. You want to have fun and be outside, and you're going to go for a walk. So there's a mistaken way of seeing those activities. You might say, "Oh, I see, you're going for a walk in order to have a fun experience outside." And you're like, "I guess, but it's not like the fun experience outside is separate from my walk. My walk is the fun experience outside." So in a similar way, Dogen talks about, it's not like the practice in a way is the enlightenment. You're enlightened, and the way that gets expressed is by practicing. So it's not an activity you do in order to get something else. It's an activity that goes on day to day. And in fact, just being enlightened means doing this practice stuff. It's just, they're deeply the same. So practice ends up being not a means to another state, but an expression of your Buddha nature. And we talked a little bit about that when we talked a little bit about Zazen. So it's a mistake to think that you do this kind of practice, you sit on the cushion, you do the practice, then you get up and that's it, it's over. And it's totally separate from your everyday life. So Dogen has, for example, fascicles there's one called washing yourself. And he's talking about how even things like brushing your teeth or washing your face can be practice. Anything can be practice for Dogen. And partly because you have Buddha nature, and practice is just Buddha nature expressing itself. So literally anything you do can be practice. So one important feature of Dogen is that practice takes on this other quality. It's not a kind of means ends activity that you do in order to get some other state. It's something you do as an expression of the state that you're already in, of your Buddha nature. So practice takes on this whole different meaning, as does enlightenment on this system. So, that's how Dogen's thinking of practice, and I just want you to keep in mind how different that is from the kinds of things we saw back in the Dhammapada. And those are both strands in Buddhist thought, but they're very different understandings about what practice is and what it's supposed to do.